All right, ready to rock. All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our improving talk of today. I'm Claudio La Sala. We're going to be talking about, I have two talks, two titles for this talk. One is, defining the bug in UX equals making things look pretty, or also, AKA UX for devs. So user experience for devs, making things look pretty useful. Because most developers have had this idea that, oh, UX is just about making buttons look, colorful or things like that. Not quite, right? It's more about, making sure that the software that we are building will be pretty useful to the people we are serving through that software. So you have my information there. I'm Claudio La Sala. You have my email up there. You have my blog address as well, where I'm often writing about this topic and related topics. You can see like a list of my areas of interest on my business card up there. Please make sure to reach out and send me an email, send me questions or comments that you might have afterwards, after this talk. You have, again, a list of my areas of interest. As you can see, besides being in the software space, I've been building software for the last 30 years or so. And I've been through a bunch of tech stacks and different types of projects, usually business type of applications. But I also try to keep a very interesting life besides, being a techie type of person, as you can see with, motorcycle riding and making music and stuff like that. That's how I managed to keep my sanity with my my software projects. So moving on from here, make sure that I have my screens also worked in a way that would make sense. There we go. Adjusting things around. Here we go. All right, perfect. All right, so why should developers care about user experience, UX? I do not remember seeing that many applications, if at all, where there was a messy experience involved. And then when I look at the code, oh, the code looks pristine. I look at it and it's very clean code, very well structured, very well architected. Usually, if the user experience, which leads into a user interface, if that whole thing is messy, the code follows suit. The code will also be messy. Counter to that, if you do have a very clean, concise user experience and user interface, chances are that the code can also be clean and concise like that. So the idea behind having great user experience is that it's going to lead to happier users, happier people who are using, again, that you are serving through the software that you are building. The features are easier to implement. I've seen projects before where user stories were sized by the number of UI controls that the feature would have, which is kind of odd. It's like, oh yeah, if we're adding 20 UI controls, like 20 text boxes to that screen, the size is going to be an 8. But if we're adding 50 controls, the size of that story is going to be 21 or what have you, which is nuts, right, to think about. Another thing is, if you have clean, concise user experience, it makes it easier to write automated tests for those. Because I've been in many teams where the reason, or one of the reasons for them not to write automated tests is that, oh, it's too hard to write tests for that feature. Because if it involves like browser automation, or if the feature does way too much, that if it has too many constraints, then writing tests for that becomes very hard, so people will not do it, right? And then, as I said, if you have concise UX, UI, then it's easier for you to write cleaner code. It's not necessarily that, code will always be clean, but it helps you if that's something that floats your boat, which is my case. So on the examples that I'm going to be showing here today, I'm going to be showing some screenshots to highlight some of the UX decisions that we've made in one of the projects that I work on. And we're going to be looking at it from a developer's point of view, because what happens is, at least for me, most of the projects I've worked on, I didn't have a UX designer dedicated to help us doing the market research and all that, and figuring out what is the problem that we're trying to solve and what are the possibilities and opportunities to better address those problems. So it was, or it is, on to the developers to come up with those decisions, right? And oftentimes, most developers, we don't think much about user experience. We think about what JavaScript library are we going to be using, what backend stack are we going to be using, right? So we end up losing that point. So that's one perspective. Another perspective is, even in projects where we did have dedicated UX designers, we didn't communicate or collaborate it in a way that was productive, right? So then it misses the point. As a developer, by learning some of those skills, if I don't have a dedicated designer, at least I can make somewhat, good decisions there. If I do have a dedicated UX designer, our communication will just potentialize, right? We're going to be way more productive in the way that we're collaborating. And we're going to be looking at some of these samples as to how those either affect the code that we wrote, or how the code that we wrote was actually leveraged to build a better user experience. Because we have certain code, because we wrote the code in a certain manner, we can actually provide a better user experience. So we're going to be looking at some of those cases here. A very common thing that happens, and I'll blame myself guilty for that in the past, is to say, oh yeah, I'm going to be building software that is foolproof, right? Because our users are not that smart. They cannot figure out, this great UI that I created, in my software, right? And we're questioning, thinking that it's a matter of intelligence or lack of. And it's not the case. It's very easy for us developers, to be working like with nice headphones and then listening to some very pleasant music, thinking, okay, this is a great UI and I'm writing beautiful code and beautiful architecture for this. It's going to work no matter what. But then we forget, or we disregard the fact that our end users, their situation may be completely different. That great UI that we've built, they may not be focused on using that UI. They're focused on their surroundings, right? Maybe they have, their customers are not that happy. They're yelling at them because of problems or something that's not to their liking. And our user is there sitting thinking, okay, I know I have this software here, but it's not helping me with everything else that is happening around us. So we fail to think about that, right? Again, we are so blindly focused on what tables and databases we have to create. What does my backend code look like? What does the UI look like? How am I going to write my JavaScript or my TypeScript to enable that UI? But chances are that most of the people using our system, they are not spending their lives looking at our beautiful UI and using our software. They're doing something else. And our software should just be a tool there to help them, get whatever they need to get done, actually, to get it done. And even if it's the users are on a calmer situation, right? Maybe having a coffee at a coffee shop and trying to get some work done there, we also don't know what else is going on. We cannot assume that they are just using our software and doing that, for their lives. They're doing other stuff, and we're failing to realize that. So for example, I know that every time I go to any kind of system and I'm trying to get something done, and oftentimes there's like a button that's disabled, or maybe the button is enabled, and then I start like filling out information in the form, and then I hit submit, and it tells me, hey, you cannot do that. Like, what do you mean? If you already knew all along that I cannot do that, why did you let me, right? Or if I'm unable to, if the little button is disabled, why can't I? right? So if you ever wonder, I'm coming to this screen here and there's a button that I'm trying to access, like in this sample here, it's an accounting part of the software, and we are looking at accounting periods, and the user would want to lock the fiscal year. Maybe the taxes have been already filed, so you want to make sure that nobody puts anything into those accounting periods. The user comes to this screen, sees that button disabled. The tooltip, the very helpful tooltip, says lock fiscal year, except that the button is disabled. Well, makes me wonder, why is it disabled? As a user, without knowing what's going on here, maybe I didn't go through whatever training would tell me why that thing is disabled. Or maybe I'm going to pick up the phone and call into customer support. And then customer support will be asking me questions about what I'm seeing here, trying to troubleshoot my problem. Oftentimes, even customer support will not know that. They're going to have to engage with developers to say, hey, we have the situation here. The person is saying that the thing is not enabled. And from what they are telling me, it should be enabled. And so it just keeps like going and going. The person keeps getting, unhappier with the situation, the cost involved with that, right? Because now you need to spend time with the customer support, with the developers. It's a disaster, right? Thinking about that. So something I've learned years ago is to anticipate and compensate. So you should anticipate questions the users would ask if you were there, right? So if you're the developer writing those expressions that will translate into a true or false to enable or disable something on the UI, every time you have a Boolean, there's a question behind it, right? It's a yes or no question. And sometimes that question may be if this, and this, and this, and not that, and not that other thing. That's a question. Those are questions that you're writing in code to answer and then decide whether something is enabled or disabled. Well, those questions the user might have. So we need to anticipate those. If you're writing if blocks or whatever kind of Boolean condition, those are questions that the user might also have. And then we need to compensate for our inability to notice and respond, because we're not there like watching the people work with our software. So we're unable to notice if they're having trouble, if they have questions about something, if the system is presenting them with something and the user goes like, well, I don't know what that means, right? How do we compensate for that? And how do we respond for that? What could we do as developers? Well, if you are a developer sitting there with the person who's trying to use the system, what you would do is observe what the user is seeing, and then you would go like, well, let me look at the code and see what the code is doing. What are the conditions that will turn that little button enable or disabled? And then you look through the code, it's like, the code looks like it's doing this or that. Can I get a copy of your data so that I can put it on my machine and troubleshoot it, right? So you have the code and you need the data. Well, the software that the user is running has your code and has the data. Might as well leverage that, right? And we're going to revisit that in just a little bit, like right here. So something we've done in this project is in certain features, if the user may have a question like that, like why am I not able to lock that fiscal year? Well, we make the button disabled and we have a little tooltip that lists these are the reasons why this button is disabled. There are fiscal periods in open status, and the preceding fiscal year is not locked. So you cannot lock this one because these are the business rules in this domain that we were requested to implement. So tell the user that, right? Instead of having the user call up customer support to look through like the rule book about this, and then asking what data the user is seeing on screen to then figure out, oh, this is why you cannot, like, no, you don't need it. And oftentimes those rules are more complex. They will engage the developers to open the code, who will open the code and trace through the rules engine to figure out why is it that that thing is disabled or enabled, right? So making use of that has been pretty helpful. Let me, oops, there we go. Look at, not amplifying any confusion that the user might have. Like say the user is sitting on this screen here. There are many things that the user could do with this, and many ways for users to get confused, because accounting is, I'm not an accountant by any stretch of imagination. So for me, it is a complex scenario, right? Not everybody is a CPA, a certified something, a professional accountants, right? So they may not know the complexity behind this domain. We don't want to amplify confusion there. So if we present the user with buttons and options for them to trigger actions, we should allow the user to experiment and answer by themselves the question, what does this button do? So that they don't go like, well, I don't want to click on it because I'm afraid it's going to do something bad. Well, instead, what we've done here is, as the user is like going around the app, instead of showing everything the user could potentially do, if they are near an area that they may want to act on, like here, they have the mouse pointer over an accounting period, period number 4, we show them, hey, you could soft close this period. Well, what does this button do? When they click on that, we tell them, this is what's going to happen, right? You clicked on the accounting period for the year of 2022. If you do soft close this period, we are going to have to go ahead and soft close all the preceding periods, including the ones from the previous year, which the user was not necessarily looking at. The user was looking at accounting periods for 2022. They were not seeing the ones for 2021. But as developers, we have the code and we have the access to the data to let the user know, hey, this is what's going to happen. You don't have to go manually soft close every single one of those periods. We can do that for you, right? But just be aware, this is what's happening, right? And of course, making sure that the standard button, the default button is the cancel so that they can get out of it. Once they've revealed what's going to be the outcome of their actions, then they move on from that, right? It's not too big of a deal. And it's not one of those like, oh yeah, any accountant should know that. Yeah, if you have, you're trying to close the current fiscal year, the previous fiscal year should also be closed. Well, maybe this person who's using the system hasn't gotten all of that knowledge yet, but we have that knowledge in the system. Bring it to the surface, right? So we do things like that. We do, even if the feature is enabled, like in this case, you see that the button is enabled. That might confuse the user too. It's like, oh, I came to this here. Why is it that that button is enabled? We also tell it because there is, again, a rules engine that defines whether that there is a true or false that drives whether that button is enabled or not. And we display that to the user because, again, it prevents the user from wanting to call customer support to ask, hey, why is this thing enabled? It's right there, right? It's, you just shorten that distance to allow the user actually to move on with their activities. In the behind the curtains, this is how the code is written, right? So somewhere we've put a simplified rules engine, right, where we look at the eligibility rules for that feature, the locking of a fiscal year. And then these are the steps that we check. Is the current fiscal year locked? Has open fiscal period? Is the preceding year not locked? Right? So it's easy to read through those rules, evaluate them, write unit tests against those rules in the backend. The code looks clean. It's pretty clear to follow along. And that information is what gets used to translate it into a true or false. So instead of telling the user, you are not allowed or you are allowed, also tell them, hey, this is why you are or you're not allowed to do whatever, right? Makes the lives of everybody much easier. Let's see, moving on. When it comes to navigation, by the way, if you all watching this, if you have questions, feel free to use the Q&A feature. I'm keeping an eye on it. If questions come up, I'll try to take them as they go, or wherever I find a good spot to tackle the question. Otherwise, I'll just keep rolling. There's a lot of stuff that I would like to share. Navigating large systems. As I said, most of my experience has been with business applications, like big business applications. And something that I've learned is to build user experience that is role specific, because different people will play different roles at a company, for instance, and they may want to do different things at different points in time. So I like to be able to let the users wear many hats. Maybe somebody, like it's you have two situations, like a very small company, for example, where one user can do everything. It's a super user. It's like, well, this person in the morning does accounting. Sometimes midday they do sales, and at the end of the day they do purchasing, right? So accountant, seller, and buyer. Those are three distinct rules. But if it's a small shop, maybe it's one user doing everything. So that user has permission to do everything. If we build a UI with that in mind, we may present the user with a lot of stuff that they don't need all of the time. Yes, they may have access, rights to do all of that, but it's unlikely that they're gonna, in one sitting, gonna do all of those things. So we like asking the user, hey, I see here that you are both an accountant type of user, a seller, and a buyer. What role are you playing right now? Right? So we ask the user that, because then we can reshape the user experience. We can provide a different user experience through the user interface based on the tasks and the roles that you're currently doing, right? So in the morning, the sign in, I'm an accountant. Sign in as an accountant. We reshape the experience based on that. Okay, now I'm switching hats. I'm going to be a salesperson. Indicate that through the UI, and we're going to reshape the experience based on what you're likely to do as a salesperson. Now, if you go to bigger corporations, right, bigger shops, you may have very distinct, okay, this user only does buying stuff. This is only a seller. This is only an accountant. And then you're already there, right? Because you've already built based on that. So all of our features are protected by permissions. So we say, in order to access this feature, this action, this one task that you're trying to accomplish, you need to have this permission. Whether you get that permission through grandfathering, yourself into the system, or through a role association or through a group association, it doesn't matter. If you do have that permission somehow, you have access to that. And then we wrap those up into the common roles that will be like a subset of those permissions. That works out pretty well. So like in this system, we have a bunch of different areas: sales, purchasing, accounting, operations, inventory, and a bunch of other stuff. So for a user that can do everything, that menu will grow pretty large. So things we've done is to say, hey, go in the application search and just type, what is it that you're trying to do? So like if I'm right now dealing with orders and I type order, if I'm a salesperson only, I would only see sales orders in sales. If I'm a super user type of user, it would show me, hey, you have orders in sales and in purchasing. Where do you want to go? So by doing that, instead of having to force the user to memorize the menu structure, just like type whatever you have in mind, and you're going to try to figure out where do you want to go from here based on the tasks that you have access to, right? So we do things like that. We take into consideration natural language. Don't make the users guess. Just tell them what certain data on the screen actually means. So for instance, in this project, we have these credit sales terms, net 30, net 60, and so on. And then it's a tabular type of thing where they can enter those and they can indicate whether discount terms are offered. If they check that box, then we display, okay, we need to gather more data. If you're indicating that we are offering discounts for this credit term, Tell us more. Do we have a percentage off when paid within a certain number of days, right? We ask those questions from the user. Once we've collected those data points from the user, instead of showing those as cells in a grid type of thing, we actually turn those, let me move that over, we turn those into a sentence, right? So again, instead of showing 10 in one cell and 5 in another, we turn that into a sentence. 10% off when paid, it should say within 5 days. And we make the most important parts like boldface, because then the user can just like skim over and see what's important. And if they are not familiar with those, they can read between the lines, so to say. So don't get them wondering, okay, is that a percentage? Is that the number of weeks or hours or months? Just tell them. We know what those things mean. They might not know, not because of a lack of intelligence. That's not at all. It just may be that they're busy with other things. They're focused on other things at that point in time, or maybe they're getting distracted, right? So just tell them. It's right there. We know what those are. We just tell them. Take what users have, right? Users may not have every information handy. Just take in whatever they have on hand, because it's not an ideal situation where you have to go through a process, like maybe it's an onboarding process where you have to fill in a lot of information, and then you go like step 1, give us this information, step 2, this information, step 3, and then you get to the last step, like, oh, I'm missing certain information, and you try to submit that, it says, no, you can't because it's missing this, that, and the other. And then you go fetch that. 30 minutes later, you come back and your session, you've been kicked out of your session and has timed out and you have to start all over. That's horrible, right? And I'm not like making this up. I'm pretty sure that everybody at one time or another has been through that kind of experience. Well, let's do a little bit better. So something we've done here is we have a customer onboarding process with a bunch of steps, right? There are groups of information that we want to gather from that customer before they like go live, so to say. So we'll take whatever information the user has, let the user type in whatever they have, whether it's accurate or not, let them just put that in. When they get to the end, the final step of that process, we'll show them, hey, look, the following information is missing, or is inaccurate, is invalid, whatever the case might be. We'll let them save that information because they may need to come back the next day. That's fine. You just save that. Oh, but now we have an invalid customer in the system. No, we don't, right? We have a bunch of forms, like physical, analog paper that somebody just put down. Okay, this is the guy's name, the address, the phone number, the email. It's just sitting there, ready to go once we finish gathering good information. So they will come back in, they'll put in whatever was missing before, we run through validations. If everything is good, go ahead and onboard that customer. Otherwise, we hold on to that data, right? So take whatever the user has available at that time and store that away for the user, right? The old meets the new. Give something the users are used to, but offer something new that they can experiment with. Many projects that I work on, they are new products that are going to replace legacy systems. And I mean, nobody likes having their cheese moved, right? People who have been using some system for many years, they're used to how it worked and behave. So when you're providing a new solution to them, make sure that you start by giving something that's familiar to that user with a way to, move on from the old way of doing things into the new way of doing things. So for example, in this system, the legacy version of the system, users are used to like Excel looking like type of applications, right? A grid with a bunch of rows, a bunch of columns, and that's how they work with data. Give them that. That's what we are doing by default. Just give the big grid to them so that they can see the information the same way they used to. And then eventually they may learn that, hey, maybe I'm looking for a vendor of a given name. Once I found it, the action buttons are all the way to the right. So they may end up hitting the wrong action button on the wrong row because they didn't even realize that they've hit the wrong one. So we offer up there a version to swap the view into a card type of view, right? Where they can see information together, where the action buttons are close to the name of the vendor, which is usually what they are looking for. And then we have, it's not on this screenshot, but different ways to filter this screen so that they can start typing things. And then we just filter. Maybe they're going to type the name of the vendor or the zip code or a part of the address where one of their vendors is, or they want to find all of those vendors that are in this specific. So we do like a full text search type of functionality to just, ask the user, what do you have? Put it in, and the system will do its best to give you what you're likely looking for, right? So then again, give them something that they are familiar with, right? And provide them an easy way to go and explore. It's like, oh, what is this? Oh, this is actually a nice way to look for and work with that data, right? So that's also appreciated by folks who have been using a legacy system. Another point here, building task-based UIs. Consider things like, what is the one thing the user wants to do now? Because we used to build applications like, oh, this is the customer screen, and it has 10 different tabs and 67 controls, UI controls on each one of those tabs, because everything there is to gather or know about a customer goes on that screen, regardless as to what the user is trying to do. So we need to flip things around, and we have to think, okay, I do understand that through permissions, this user can do everything and can have access to all the data. But let's realize or recognize what is the one task the user is trying to do right now. What is it that they have on hand? Maybe they have a person's social security number, or maybe they have a passport number, or maybe they have a driver license number. What is it that they are likely to have at that point in time? Take that in, and then ask the question, are they trying to make a decision based on the information that we'll find for them that we do have in the system? Or are they trying to perform a task based on what the system tells them that, hey, this is the state of the system or the world at this point in time? We need to understand those things to provide a better experience to the user, right? And create a user interface to allow them to accomplish that task. An example that I always bring up is, many years ago, I worked on this project where it was for a knee doctor's office, and many celebrities would call in to schedule an appointment. And some celebrities would call in and say, hey, I would like to schedule an appointment with Dr. XYZ. The person on the other side would say, oh, sure, what's your name? And then they would hear something like Madonna. Okay, they would take that in instead of going, oh, no, man, I need your full legal name. No, you don't. At that point, really, just to book an appointment, you don't need that. Just that person is giving you that name, just put that down, right? When that person shows up for their consultation, they'll have to sign in. May I see a valid ID? What form of ID? Depending on the kind of business, the form of ID may be different. And that's where you take, okay, you should have that, on hand. If you don't, is there a process for us to still check you into the system and having some sort of like pending tasks, like, okay, we're going to take you in, but you're not going to be able to get out before we get this, or you're not going to get test results until we get the following thing, right? Take what the users have, allow them to move forward with what they're trying to get done, and guide them through the process. You know what's needed, right? You know what you need to be able to move them forward. So work with them in that manner. Here's an example. So building software where there's inventory control involved, there's people going into a warehouse and then trying to get a count for how many of a certain products they have in stock and updating the system. So we could present the users with a table type of thing where we list all of the lot information of certain products, and we show to the user, hey, this is how many the system thinks that we have on hand. And then that person might look at the inventory and say, oh no, that's not the quantity we have on hand. I need to make a correction. We could turn that into an Excel type of thing where we just say, hey, type in the quantity on hand that you think we have right now. That is one way of doing it, but that's not necessarily the information that the user has on hand at that time. Because doing some research, what happens is the person may be walking the warehouse and they see, oh, I'm seeing, like in this sample here, 45 broken cases of that product. It's damaged. So we cannot account for that quantity anymore. So what the user has is, we need to decrease quantity by this number. Put that in. On the other hand, it could be something like, well, they delivered something and I just found an extra box right behind the counter. So what I want to do is come here and say, hey, we need to increase that quantity by a given number, right? Why is that important? Because that's the information that they have on hand. And they don't have to do math to say, oh, how many did we have? How many did we lose or found? They don't need to do any of that. They just indicate the information that they currently have, don't have to think about it, just keep, chugging through their work. Or they might go and say, nope, I went where we store those items and I can count. We have 5 of those. Okay, so it's not increase by or decrease by, it's adjust to 5, because that's what we have there. I don't need to do any math or any kind of special thing. Once we understood that these are the reasons why somebody would want to change that number, then we were able to create this very specific task-oriented UI to give the user this kind of experience where they can get in, put that information in, and get out. When it comes to even testing, I said, creating experiences through a user interface that looks like that makes it easier for us to write automated tests, like an end-to-end test, which in this case we wrote in Cypress.io. This is what the test looks like, right? So we have this standard where we define what are the permissions the user should have in order to access this task. And then the description, hey, given the list of inventory lots, when I select to adjust the lots, and then I see the lot adjustment screen, and then I indicate this, I do that. So we're describing the feature, right? When it comes to implementing that code, the front end, this is an Angular front end. We have a model that represents that UI, like a lot adjustment. These are the bits of information that we need to collect from the user so that we can process that task. Then someplace in the front-end code, we make a call into an endpoint, right? Adjustments, create. We are sending the inventory lot adjustment. On the other side of the wall, right, on the back end, same way, we have an API endpoint that receives that call and receives a similar model, right? Whatever data is coming into, as JSON, we put it into this model that represents the task that the user is trying to accomplish. It's not a model that has everything there is to know about lots at the warehouse. No, it's just something that represents that one task that the user wants to do at that one point in time. Much smaller context, way easier to design the UI for that, the user interface for that, much easier to write tests for it, end-to-end tests, much easier to write the code that implements the front end and the back end, and also have tests like validation tests that only validate this command. You don't have to validate the world. You just have to validate this one command. It's the one task the user is trying to do. Makes things a lot easier. As I said on the beginning, in case you missed, if you do have questions, please use the Q&A feature in Zoom there. And I'm monitoring here. If questions come up, I'll take them as they go. Another point here is try to keep in mind what the user is actually thinking, what the person is thinking, right? If they are presented with a list of options, like here, certain colors, for example, right? And they're seeing this limited list, available list, and then they have this button here, I doubt that the user is thinking, I cannot find the option that I'm looking for. I want to load more. They're not thinking like that. We developers are, because we are thinking, oh yeah, when they click here, we're going to have to load more data from our backend. No person outside of developers would be thinking that way. They'll be thinking, hey, I want to see more. Do we have more? Right? So see more. Because if you think about it, if there is an option to click on here to display more options, and we want to have something to counter that, what would that say? Unload more or load less? It does not make sense, right? We could say see more. That's what I want to see. Oh, I want to see more. Oh, too much. I want to see less. It's more natural language. It's what most people are thinking, right? So try to recognize those patterns. Just check. There's something that came up here. Okay, there's a question asking, how can I access the recording? It will be available usually the next business day after the talk. So sometime tomorrow, you should be able to access the recording. Thanks for the question. And let's keep on going here. Oops. All right. Another point that I always make, watch your language. And what I mean by that is the wording, the words that we are using in our feature. Like back in the day, but we are still doing that, we had screens, that's our CRUD screens, where you go into that screen like a sales order screen. We have UI control, grid, and whatever. And then at the bottom, we have cancel, delete, save. Those are all bad terms. Because think about it. You're on the phone taking a sales order or reviewing a sales order with a customer, and then you realized you've opened the wrong sales order. You say, oh, yeah, oh, no, hold on, let me just cancel this. The person on the other side is going to say, no, I'm not calling to cancel the order. No, that's not what I mean. I mean that, never mind, right? Because, well, what happens if the user does call in or the client does call in to say, hey, I would like to cancel an order? Well, now cancel here was used meaning I want to dismiss this dialogue or this screen, right? Well, now you've burned that cancel, which does have a business meaning here, right? So what do? And then delete, right? There's no customer calling in to say, yes, I placed an order this morning. I would like to delete it. It makes no sense, right? They will call in to say, I would like to cancel my order. Well, so how do? We go to the sales order screen and we hit the delete button, right? And then last but not least, save, right? It's like, oh, is the sales order dying for some reason, right? Save is usually used with the meaning of, I want to take that data and I want to persist it somewhere in a database, in an XML file on disk, whatever the case might be. Nobody's going to call in to say, hey, can you save my order? No, right? Can you bill me for my order? Can you invoice me for my order? Can you ship my order? Right? Those are the business terms used. So instead of having, like in a sales order example, a save button, which doesn't have business meaning, maybe consider having something like ship this order, or mark as available for shipping, or invoice the order. Whatever the next process, business process is, maybe that should be the name of that button, right? So taking more of those things into consideration. In my mind, in my view of the world, we shouldn't see delete on any UI, period, because that's never what the user really wants to do, is to delete. All right, good deal. Let's see, what else have we got here? Last but not least, so we talked about many concepts around user experience and user interface, right? So user experience, think the person. What is the person trying to do in their daily life? Okay, what is the best experience we can have through our application? Our application is just one part of the whole equation. And if it is a software solution process, how does the person interact with the system? That's the difference between UX and UI, right? User interface. How are they interfacing with the system? How is the system interfacing back with the person? So there's a lot of consideration there, and we need to see those things in a clear manner. Now, in order to get to those realizations, it comes from having better user stories, right? So we do have to take a step back and think, how are we writing our user stories? What kind of conversations are we having around our user stories? And I have a whole separate talk about user stories, but here I'm going to just give a brief sample as to what that would look like. For example, say I have this user story here. In order to quickly navigate through sales orders, as a salesperson, I want to see a list of all existing sales orders. That's a user story. That's easy, right? As a developer, here, hold my beer. Let me go write a query that says select star from sales order, dump that into a grid, and then move on, because it's that simple. Well, no, hold on. First, why is it important? What value does it bring to the people we are serving for this feature here, like to quickly navigate through sales orders? Why do you want to quickly navigate through sales orders? Why does that make sense? I want to see a list of all existing sales orders. Do you really, if you're a business that has thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of sales orders over the lifetime of your business, do you really want to see all of those? And do you really expect to quickly go through those? What are you doing? Speed reading. That's probably, right? The user story does not convey the value that we're trying to bring into the people's lives that we are serving. So after research and conversation, we were able to actually nail that down to the following. In order to better assist the customer, that there is value, right? A business wants to better assist the customer and quickly move on to the next customer, right? Because as it turns out, their salespeople are on the phone with customers. So they want to make sure that they assist better this customer here so they can quickly move on to the next one, right? As a salesperson taking a call working at my desk, why is that important? Is that salesperson working on their smartphone, maybe with a Bluetooth headset, working with that customer? Or do they have like dual monitors in front of them with a lot of real estate that we can present them with information? So this is important. We know that, nope, they are working at their desk with their computer set up, multiple screens and all. That's useful information. It allows developers to come up with a better implementation and better opportunities for that. Or if we do have a UX designer, they can use that information to understand, okay, what kind of information do we have to display to the user? Are they on their phone? No, they're on big computer, big screens. Okay, there's more we can do with that. I want to quickly see the customer sales orders, the customer that I have on the phone, not all of sales orders, just the ones from that customer, filtered to the open orders, and I have access to the pending ones, because 9 out of 10 times, those customers are calling to either place an order or to ask for a status or make changes to open orders or pending orders, right? So that's what really they wanted, or that's actually what they needed, right? The one on top is what it was the wanted. Like, nope, that's not what they want. This is what you actually need. So for better UX, those conversations have to be had. If you have user stories that don't convey the value or the problem that you're trying to solve, take a step back and ask the questions, because then it will facilitate the creation of those features, the creation of task-based UIs, the writing of automated tests for that, the writing of cleaner code, the ways to leverage the code that we write to bring information to the surface and have that displayed to the users, to the people who are interacting with the software that we're building, right? So that customer support will not have to have calls about why is this thing enabled or disabled. Well, the application has all of that information. It just hasn't been exposed. We can expose that. All right, and I think we're just about ready to wrap this up. Please go ahead and submit your questions, should you have them. As we have a few minutes here to tackle those. As you may be busy typing your questions, let me tell you or recommend 2 books that I found invaluable to learn some things that help me have this like more of a UX type of mindset, even though I'm by heart a software developer. Badass Making Users Awesome, outstanding book, and The Design of Everyday Things. These 2 books gave me a lot of things to think about, a lot of actionable advice on things that I could like, okay, let me try those and see how it works. And I tried a lot of them and they worked really well. And I can also put a call out or plug next week's Improving Talk. A good friend of mine, Danny Krupp, he will be talking about the Design of Everyday Things book applied to software specifically. And we happen to work on the same project. So some of his samples will be a different perspective to some of what I described. And he's going to take a whole different approach to delivering this kind of content. So make sure to check it out next week. Also, if you would like to get a copy of this presentation so that you can review later, maybe discuss it with your team later, with your company, please send me an email. You can, you have my email up there on the screen. Send me an email so I can send you a link to that presentation. If you do have more questions or comments, concerns that come up afterwards, please make sure to reach out, connect with me on LinkedIn if you're in that network to further our conversations. And let's see, do we have any questions coming in here? Do not see anything. All right, good. Well, that's all I had. As I said, I blog a lot about this topic and related topics, so make sure to check it out. I hope you've enjoyed this presentation. I hope you got some good guidance or ideas out of it. Try them out and reach out to me as you experience those, and let's keep our conversation going. I hope you enjoy the rest of the day. Bye. Thanks, everybody.